is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Now, as a footballer, George Weah won accolades few could hope for, picking up the Ballon d'Or and seizing African Footballer of the Year on multiple occasions, alongside a raft of team honors. Fewer still would dare dream of leading their countries. But after winning around 61% of votes in Liberia's presidential election, George Weah from the Congress for Democratic Change Party is set to do just that, become Liberia's first president in the country's first democratic transition in many decades. But he walks into the presidency with supporters expecting him to score highly for a nation that has 80% of its population living on less than $1 a day. So what challenges lie ahead for the president-elect? And what other lessons can be learned from Weah's journey from footballer to president? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Well, former football star George Weah has won Liberia's presidential runoff election and will succeed incumbent Ellen Johnson Sirleaf next week in the country's first democratic transition in decades. Now, while he's known to the rest of the world primarily as a football star, in Liberia he has in fact already established himself as a politician to be reckoned with. Sonny Metho is standing by with a brief background on the new Liberian president-elect. Sonny?
Raised in a Monrovia slum, George Weah's story is the stuff of legend. He dropped out of school to play soccer, and his talents were discovered by one Arsene Wenger, who took him off to AS Monaco. The rest is history. Weah is determined, though, that the legend doesn't end there. He made his first bid for presidency in 2005, losing in a runoff to Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Critics have questioned his lack of experience. He's still relatively young at 51, but Weah has been a senator since 2014. Supporters say he has grassroots appeal and that his rags to riches story resonates in a country where so many live in desperate poverty. Back to you.
Now, Weah will be sworn in as president of Liberia in the coming week, and just about everybody agrees he faces a monumental task ahead in solving the many challenges faced by one of the poorest countries in the world. But there is one place in the country where faith in the former footballer is absolute: his hometown. CGTN's Robert Nagila has the story.
Ask anyone in Claratown who they voted for.
George Weah. I voted, my husband voted, my children, even my neighbor in the house voted for him.
It is here, in this sprawling neighborhood, a young George Weah spent his formative years.
Anywhere we go, the crowd will just like his business.
53-year-old Renem Gaba grew up and played football with Weah in the 80s. He says Weah's raw talent was already on display back then. But it is his concern for others that endeared him to many.
For me, myself get confidence in him because from our youth days, you're a man who like to share. Especially when we're having problems, at the time we're in Sofia, we're having problems, you're always championing the cause.
And he will need that side of him to solve the country's many challenges. Like many towns in Liberia, Claratown has no running water, no sewer system, and many of the children here do not go to school.
The junior system is very poor, and we experience flood during the rainy season. That's a very major challenge that we have in the community.
Few government services are available. Many have no access to health care. Talk to anyone in this community and they're absolutely ecstatic that one of their own is about to be the next president of Liberia. Now, we managed to track down his grandmother's house, that is it, but we are told that George Weah himself spent many a night in this one-bedroom house.
This house was owned by my late grandmother, the woman who read George Weah, Emma Brown. Junior boy, calling Junior boy, he used to sleep here. They were all in this room together.
More than 80% of Liberia's population live in extreme poverty. Many here believe because of Weah's humble upbringing, he understands the plight of most Liberians better than the elite politicians.
On behalf of the Board of Commissioners, do hereby declare the presidential ticket of Senator George Weah and Joy Howard Taylor as the winner.
As he prepares to take over the reins from outgoing President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, his childhood friend has a message.
Right now, the expectation is too much. The expectation. So he got to really entrust himself and know how to carry on his normal business.
Can the former three-time World Footballer of the Year transform his magic off the pitch as he once did on it? Here in Claratown, they're backing him to do just that. Robert Nagela, CGTN, Monrovia, Liberia.
And now to give us a bit more background on the former footballer who is about to become Liberia's president, I'm joined in studio by CGTN sports editor Sadiq Shaban. Sadiq, thank you for joining us on Talk Africa. George Weah is about to become Liberia's president, Africa's foremost footballer. From football to presidency, did this come as a surprise to you?
Not quite. I think a lot of people who have followed King George from his days as a footballer would actually then relate to him at his political peak, because this is not the first time he's been, if you like, at the top of his game. In 1995, he was the only recipient from Africa, and still remains the only recipient from Africa, of the prestigious FIFA Ballon d'Or award. The same year in 1995, he was named the World Footballer of the Year, the European Footballer, and also the African Player of the Year. So this is a man that has come from the trenches, if you will, and risen to the top of his game. This new dispensation in politics is just a culmination of a long journey that George Weah has had over the years.
What is it that, that has kept his quest for the presidency since 2005?
I think what George Weah built over years in his life as a professional footballer followed him when he retired in 2003. This is a man that galvanized the country during his days as a footballer. He may not have played at the World Cup or at the African Cup of Nations with the Liberian football team, but when he played in Europe with Monaco way back in 1986, when he played with Manchester City, when he played with a number of teams in France, Cameroon, and Cote d'Ivoire, this is a person who endeared himself to millions of people. And that legion of support just followed him to the ballot. And I think after years of trying, and as like football they say, you may win the first game, draw the second one, but eventually you will win the cup. This is George Weah, who's won the presidency. But this would not be seen so much as a success at this time. Right. There are people also who inspired him, and he says over the years, a number of footballers also who've tried to their hands in politics, but didn't quite make it as George Weah.
Of course, we've got many people, many footballers, great footballers in Africa, but they haven't really given back as such in terms of governance, though, in their countries, whether it's post-conflict or during conflict or during trying times, though. Is there a relationship here now, though, between sports and governance in, African countries and sports people as role models?
I think George Weah would redefine this. Africa compares very unfavorably with the rest of the world when it comes to footballers, sports people, and artists transitioning and using their fame from whichever field they're coming into politics. The former Prime Minister of Faroe Islands, Leo Johansson, was a goalkeeper in his country. Romario, a popular Brazilian footballer, is now a Senate member in Brazil and is eyeing a president in some days to come. The current Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, was a celebrated footballer in his own right. But in Africa, we only have George Weah. But all is not lost, because we have a legion of new generational players, the likes of Samoa Gyan, Samuel Eto'o, Didier Drogba, who many people are saying perhaps could learn a thing or two from George Weah. And I'm very pleased to inform you, Beatrice, that in Senegal, El Hadj Diouf is a retired footballer, and I spoke to him in Ghana during the African Football Awards, and he says, George Weah inspired me a great lot, and I'm now back in Senegal, not as a footballer, but as a citizen, and I want to influence things around in the country and use my fame. So who knows, perhaps there could be a drop of George Weah in so many African footballers.
Well, what kind of a president, though, would we be expecting George Weah to be, being a famous former footballer?
Being the only African recipient of the FIFA Ballon d'Or and Player of the Year, and being such a lethal striker back in the days, the era of Rashid Yekini, JJ Okocha, and Abedi Pele, many people would expect that George Weah would, being a striker, would lead from the front. I mean, that's what we've known him for, taking opportunities and converting them into success. All those caps he's had with the national team and as a player, professional player in Europe, culminated in trophies and caps individually. So based on his playing position, many people would say George Weah should in fact be converting these opportunities into finished products. And I think this is what is needed for Liberia after so many years of strife and Ebola and so many other things that has bedeviled Liberia. This is a man that people are expecting to lead from the front, as he's been doing that in football, and taking every opportunity that is thrown his way to convert them into something positive.
Indeed, this will be the first transition of a post-conflict Liberia, and we will be waiting to see what kind of a presidency George Weah will be bringing to Liberia. For now, we're going to take a short break, but when we return, we'll have more insights into George Weah and the challenges he will face as he prepares to take the helm in Liberia. To stay with us.
China Global Television Network. From broadcast centers in Beijing, Washington, and Nairobi. A unique global perspective. 6 channels and a video content service. News when you want it and where you want it. On TV screens, websites, mobile platforms, and social media. CGTN. See the difference.
And now to offer further analysis on Liberia's president-elect and the road ahead for the country, I have expert guest standing by in London. Dr. Alex Vines is the head of the Africa program at Chatham House. In Johannesburg, Fonte Akum, he's a senior researcher in the Peace and Security program at the Institute of Security Studies. And still with me here in Nairobi, CGTN sports editor Sadiq Shaban. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on Talk Africa. Dr. Vines, first to you though, you've lived in Liberia, looking back at the events that have unfolded over the last 6 months with the Liberian presidential election. Did it come as a surprise to you, though, to see Africa's greatest footballer being elected president there, having watched Liberia's politics over some time?
Well, if you'd told me 5 years ago that George Weah would have been president, I'd have been a bit surprised. His previous attempt to become president, he didn't campaign well, he seemed inexperienced, but he has matured, he's learned. I mean, that's what this man is all about. He was not a football god for nothing. So I wasn't surprised that on the 26th of December, the Liberian electorate in the second round elected him president. It's a really historic watershed moment for Liberia. Not only has a football god become president in Liberia, but also it's the first time that there has been a peaceful transfer of civilian presidents in Liberia since 1944. So this is very, very significant for Liberia, for Africa, and indeed for the world, I would say.
Alex, though, you do mention that he has matured and he has learned over the last 10 years since his first attempt in 2005. Though, tell us a bit more about that maturity, knowing Liberia's politics and transitional politics as you've seen it. Where has he matured? What are we seeing here?
Well, he's got himself better educated. One of the things that his critics always said was that he hadn't got a university education, that he was just a football soccer player, that he wouldn't be fit for leading Liberia as president. And so he'd internalized some of those issues. He's also learnt about the regional politics of Liberia. So his alliance, for example, with the ex-wife of the former President warlord Charles Taylor, Jill Taylor, that was all about getting numbers and support, because he always assumed that he would probably need to go to a second round to get a majority, which was spot on. That's exactly what happened. And then he's really worked with Liberian youth. I mean, the majority of the Liberian population is youth, and they wanted somebody different from normal Liberian politics. And so the youth really did come out and support him very significantly, including in the second round. Although the numbers voting was significantly down, young people still came out and voted.
Right.
So he's a clever politician, I think. And let's just see what his track record will be now.
Right. Fonte Akum, your thoughts on Liberia's politics there?
Well, I think that larger than President-elect George Weah is the fact that the elections were actually peaceful, given the challenges that were faced by both the electorate and all the institutional actors involved with organizing these elections. As we are very well aware, the National Elections Commission acquitted itself very well in organizing the first elections that it's organized independently without that much outside assistance. Second, we need to also acknowledge that there's some degree of maturity within Liberia's political space as the Supreme Court of Liberia stepped in to actually settle elections-related disputes between the different presidential aspirants. So we come out of this process with President-elect George Weah not only winning after the second round, which took place on the 26th of December, but we have an electorate that has seen the Liberian Supreme Court do its job and do it very well. And we also have the National Elections Commission. And these are institutions which have acquitted themselves very well, and we hope that they augur better for Liberia's democratic future.
Fonte, just to come back on the peaceful demonstration there from Liberia, though, but George Weah's vice president-elect is actually the ex-wife of former President Charles Taylor, who's serving time in a British jail there. I mean, the legacy of Liberia's civil war, how is that going to play out, having former Mrs. Taylor now as the vice president?
Well, I think when you look at the actors involved at the elite level in Liberia's politics today, George Weah is one of those individuals who embodies the resilience, the temerity of Liberia's youth. As we are very well aware, when George Weah was at the top of his game in 1995, Liberia was caught in the middle of a civil war. So within Liberia's political space, Weah does not just come in with a certain degree of detachment from that civil war. I mean, detachment is not being an active participant in the civil war, but he comes in as a person who should be able, with the backing of Liberia's people, to actually govern from the center. The second thing is, when you look at the actors with whom George Weah actually organized a coalition to be able to win, right. Whether you look at Jewel Taylor, the wife of ex-President Charles Taylor, or you look at Alex Tyler, the former Speaker of Liberia's Parliament, who resigned under the cloud of an a corruption scandal, or we look on the other hand to Prince Johnson, who actually lent his support to George Weah for the second round of elections. Obviously, these are individuals who come with a lot of baggage from the Civil War era. But that exemplifies the complexity of Liberia's political space, the mix of those who can actually raise the spirits of the people.
Right. Alex, I do want to get your view on that, the legacy of that civil war. And of course, Liberia's politics has been quite peaceful up until this point. Though, how is this all going to play out, though, having that shadow of Charles Taylor hanging in the background?
Look, I mean, I lived and worked for the United Nations in the Liberian Civil War, so I was there towards the end of it, 2001 to 2003. I've seen how horrible things could get in Liberia with my own eyes. And, you know, let's give credit to the outgoing president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. She stabilized Liberia. The country has been at peace for a decade, and she's given a reasonable platform now for George Weah to take over. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf herself had to make many compromises. Indeed, she had dealings with Charles Taylor in the past before she became president. So it's not surprising at all that Weah has had to make alliances with Jewel Taylor and indeed getting the vote from another former warlord, Prince Johnson. That's the reality of Liberian politics. My greatest single concern moving forward, if we're looking forward now, is that the president-elect is able to choose good advisors. That's going to be really key for him. So is he going to get good advice in terms of attracting investment and rebuilding the Liberian economy that has suffered both from the legacy of Ebola most recently, but also the impact of a commodity downturn.
Right, Sadiq, we are seeing, though, the peaceful transition here having largely been credited with George Weah's larger-than-life football career in Liberia, though. So clearly there is a role here in Africa's sports and post-conflict transitions.
Certainly, and if Africa were to look at George Weah as a motif of hope and a beacon of national unity, then I think other countries have quite a lot to learn. Prior to George Weah's election, Africa has had great sportsmen and women. I think there's quite a lot that sportsmen and women of Africa can be able to play beyond the sports. When the whistle stops or when the play is over, where do we take our African stars? And I think George Weah has indeed indicated that there could be an opportunity here. It's just a matter of harnessing that goodwill into something of a national movement which can bring people together.
Right, Fonte Akum, I do want to come to you with one of Alex's concerns there about moving forward, because not much is known about the policies or the proposed policies of George Weah and his team. And given the absence of that up until this point, though, what kind of leadership, though, should we expect from George Weah and his team?
Well, I think it would be relevant to look to the past, to look into the future. George Weah has exhibited the ability to create a winning coalition as the only political party or platform that created a coalition to actually win these elections. The second thing is he attempted to run in 2005 and failed. And the second go around, he actually joined a ticket as vice presidential candidate. And this time he is lucky. So he has shown that he has the resilience to actually keep going at this. So I think Liberia finally has an individual who should be able to use the same football metaphors and analogies that we have been seeing and hearing about over the past couple of weeks. That is, being that good manager, being that person who assembles the right team with the right people at the right positions, being that person who assigns responsibilities and hold people to account to execute and perform at the same level at which he performed on the soccer field. So if he brings these things together, I think George Weah, Liberia has the human capital necessary and the economic wealth to be able to move forward and meet the challenges, whether they are economic, coming out of the Ebola virus disease and its impact on the economy, or continuing on the path of stabilization and recovery since the Civil War ended.
Right, Alex Vines, George Weah has shown tenacity and resilience in becoming the president since 2005, trying in 2005 his football career and as well being a senator in his country. So what kind of challenges, though, is he likely to be facing? How do you see him overcoming those challenges?
Look, anybody who would be president in Liberia would have enormous challenges. The economy is a weak one. It's very reliant on commodity exports. There is very high youth unemployment and a very large informal economy. So he's going to have to focus on trying to attract investment, trying to create jobs, improving education, which is a dire problem. Liberia needs to skills up. But I am hopeful that his experience as a world-class sports person will help him. It's a good thing that he's a former football player, because it is about teamwork. It is about finding the right combination of people. It's about motivation. It's about principles. And thank goodness he's not a long-distance runner or coming out of a selfish sport, because that's not what's needed in Liberia. It is about effective teamwork.
Right, Sadiq, he's a world-class sports person here. So obviously there are going to be lessons that can be learned from George Weah's tenacity, as I would call it there. What kind of lessons is this giving other sports people, be they people who may want to pursue positions of governance in their home countries or post-conflict situations?
I think throughout his life, as has been mentioned, George Weah depended on other people to supply him football, to supply him opportunities to score. He has depended so much on people from midfield, from the defense and the goalkeeper to give him opportunities to score. It will be the same thing, I would imagine, that he will have to depend on other people to actualize his vision. And what sportsmen and women of Africa will be looking at will be nothing short of successful political undertaking. They have known him as a world-class footballer and the only man of his generation to have won the best award in the world. So the sports people of Africa will be looking very clearly at Liberia and say, look, if George Weah were able to have a fantastic personal career in Europe, in parts of Africa, and winning the top accolades in football, what will prevent him in Africa from being that a winning politician? And I think the stakes are very high here. And George Weah may find himself under a lot of pressure, not just from those he's leading, but also from a legion of millions of Africans who have known him and idolized him from his day as a world-class footballer.
Indeed, he's going to have a lot of pressure from all over Africa here. Fonte Akum, as we wind up here, of course, this is Liberia's first real transition after the civil war, and there is going to be a lot of optimism from the Liberian people. What can we expect from Liberia now over the next 6 years during this administration?
Well, I think that the expectations are not just expectations of the Liberian people, but expectations of the international community as well. The Liberian people have spoken, they have elected a leader. It would be important that the international community actually backs Liberia in this continuous process as well. And if they get that backing from the international, if George Weah, President-elect, gets that backing from the international community that outgoing President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf got as well, I'm sure that we can expect Liberia's economy to continue on its path to recovery after the Ebola virus disease. We can expect that those jobs of which Alex Vines speaks are going to be created within the Liberian economy. And we can expect that he would put in the infrastructure necessary to actually combat corruption, which has been a challenge which Ellen Johnson Sirleaf admittedly failed and was unable to tackle.
Right, Alex Vines, winding up thoughts. Is George Weah going to be able to tackle the challenges that Johnson Sirleaf was unable to?
Certainly, I think he'll need to focus on corruption, but I think he also will need to manage expectation, because the expectation of Liberian youth about what he can deliver is way too high at the moment. So he's going to have to be very careful to manage those expectations. Otherwise, they could be really a disappointment quite quickly and a backlash, and that wouldn't help him longer term. So he needs to be realistic in his speeches about what he can deliver, because getting the growth and getting the international support to Liberia is going to be hard work, and it is going to take time.
All right, gentlemen, we'll leave it there for the moment, and that's all we have time for this week. But thank you to my guests for their insights. In London, Dr. Alex Vines, head of the Africa program at Chatham House. In Johannesburg, Fonte Akum, senior researcher in the Peace and Security program at the Institute of Security Studies. And in Nairobi, CGTN sports editor Sadiq Shaban. Thank you for joining us on Talk Africa. Do remember, though, you can join the conversation online through Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And do tune in again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall. Goodbye.